起你嘅武器。
Something that I think is really funny when I was playing Sifu was that I wasn't really thinking about other martial arts games like Absolver or anything like that. Really, what I was being reminded of were Spider-Man games. Specifically, what was reminding me of Spider-Man games was this very tight grasp on intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. And while yes, I think that the Spider-Man games are really good examples of talking about extrinsic and intrinsic motivators, I think that Sifu's utilization of motivators is a little bit easier to point out because it is used in basically every facet of the design, as well as a little bit in the narrative also. So that's what I want to do, is I want to use Sifu as this lens that we can use to view and explain and talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. I think the easiest way to explain is that extrinsic motivation is something like a trophy, a gold star, a high grade, something external that is motivating you to do a good job or to do a certain task. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, comes from within. It's the desire to do something good or well or what have you because it brings you joy or because it satisfies you in some way. You're not looking for any accolades or anything like that. You're doing it just because you want to do it for yourself. The reason I bring up Spider-Man games is because those are probably one of the most well-known and easiest ways to point at something and be like, this is a good example of intrinsic motivation. What I mean specifically is the web swinging. In a Spider-Man game, no one is telling you to web swing. No one is typically saying that you need to web swing from A to B. Truly, you could just walk everywhere or jump everywhere or web zip everywhere. No one is forcing you to web swing. No one's forcing you to web swing in a cool manner also. However, most of the time you are going to web swing and you're going to try and do it in a more stylish way than you might need to. There's a bunch of videos and communities and threads talking about different movement tech in specific Spider-Man games in order to basically just look cool as you're traversing around, and no one is forcing you to do that. And so the web swinging is typically a really good example of intrinsic motivation. You want to look cool, so you're just gonna try. In your desire to look cool, you try harder. Could you make the argument that, well, you're rewarded by doing cool web swinging with seeing more visually pleasing animations or maybe a scoring system or something like that? Yes, maybe you could make that argument, but it's not a zero-sum game. Something can be intrinsically and extrinsically motivating. A high score, for example. Yes, you are externally receiving a higher score, and maybe in a Devil May Cry game, you could get a S rank or something to that extent. But also internally, you are striving to do that because you want to do that. So this idea that extrinsic motivations and intrinsic motivations are diametrically opposed and you can't have both in the same thing is kind of not true. It's just that typically certain rewards or mechanics or games or what have you will just shade or lean a little bit more on one or the other. I like to view these things not necessarily as hard rules or guidelines or what have you, but more so tools that we can use to talk about and discuss and critique art. If things like this had an obvious answer or an objectively correct answer, the conversations would both be very short and not really enjoyable to have. So with that in mind, let's talk about Sifu. The high level idea of Sifu is that when you were a kid, you were forced to hide and watch as your master's former students destroyed the temple, killed your master, and stole, I think it was a scroll, it might have been a talisman, an item of extreme importance. The kicker is that they also noticed you as well, and they actually killed you on that night. However, because of this magical talisman that you were near, you actually come back to life, and now you have trained your entire life to get revenge for your master, destroy all these former students, and recover the artifact. And the help of this revive assistance artifact, you start crossing people off of your conspiracy board board until it's just you and the ringleader. When I was thinking about how best to describe the gameplay of this game, I thought it was a great mixture of a beat 'em up, but also a fighting game. What I mean by that is that the style of levels and progression through those levels does feel like an old beat 'em up arcade game, like River City Ransom, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games, things like that, where you pick an overarching scenario and it takes you to different spaces within that scenario where you have to defeat a certain amount of people to progress to the next area in order to get to the boss at the end. Where it feels like a fighting game, though, is the incredibly in-depth combat system, which it's great that it's in-depth because that's basically all you're doing this whole game. They have combos, they have reversals, they have a bunch of directional inputs as well. It really does feel like as you're playing this game and getting better at it, you are learning a fighting game character similar to Ken or Ryu or what have you. I want to go back to the self-reviving mechanic because I think that that is probably one of the best examples of extrinsic motivation that they use in this game. Essentially, for this mechanic, there are two very important numbers that you need to pay attention to throughout the game, those being your age and your death counter. For your age, you start at 20 years old and your death counter starts at 0. However, if you end up dying, which you probably will because this game is difficult, it's meant to be challenging, but when you die, three things happen. Your death counter goes up by 1, your age goes up by the amount of your death counter, and then you revive back on the spot. Enemies are all the same as they were when you died. So for example, if this is your first death, your death counter goes up by 1 to 1, your age goes from 20 to 21 because your death counter is only at 1, and you come back up. If you die again though, your death counter goes up by 1 to 2, and then your age goes to actually 23 because your death counter is at 2, so it's adding 2 to your overall age. You can keep going through this process until you hit the age 80, and then it's a full game over. However, you're probably not going to want to get to that age because with every 10-year bracket, your overall health goes down and your damage goes up. So yes, it is kind of a buff technically, but it's also a debuff. It's a very interesting style of balancing that I will talk about later. Another thing about this age mechanic is that say you beat stage 1 at age 25. You can either choose to start stage 2 at the age that you ended at, so 25, or you can replay stage 1 and try and beat it with a lower age. If you manage to beat it at a lower age, let's say 22, you then can carry that 22 over to stage 2 instead of the 25. What I mean when I say this is a really good extrinsic motivator, it comes down into that aspect where you're carrying your age over from one stage to the next. If we want to think about our age kind of like the amount of lives that we have left, then when you finish a stage, you're probably going to think, dang, I really want more lives that I can bring over into the next stage because I know that the game is just going to get harder. Let me replay this level, try and be a little bit better now that I know more, try and end it at a lower age so that I can carry that buffer over. I use this age and revive mechanic as my example of extrinsic motivation because I also want to talk about how this mechanic is a really great example of having your narrative, your gameplay, and your overall message that you're trying to communicate with this game tied up together into one thing and have it be extremely cohesive. Basically, in my opinion, almost every aspect of this age mechanic is incredibly smart and only makes the game better and more interesting. So let's start with the fact that it is an age mechanic. I know that I tied it to the concept of how many lives you have left, and in theory, yes, they could have really easily just made a regular life mechanic. However, they chose to make it that you age up and have a max amount of years that you can complete this game because they wanted to communicate this idea of all-consuming revenge. As you're going on this quest for revenge, you literally are sacrificing years and years and years off of your life to get this done, and it gets worse and worse and worse. This is meant to exemplify the all-consuming and draining nature of a quest for revenge. It will literally take everything from you. It will take all of your youth, all of your life from you. And this all-consuming nature of hatred and revenge gets highlighted on the level where you're trying to take down the artist and the museum. What I mean by that is that not only does the game have a huge difficulty spike specifically with the artist boss, the artists themselves also have a lot of dialogue talking about how revenge is a runaway train and how it will take everything from you. And so having this huge difficulty spike where you are most likely going to die is forcing you to engage with this mechanic that the dialogue of the artist is talking about, the nature of this revenge. On top of that, this is also the level where they introduce bladed weaponry, and your moveset when you're using that bladed weaponry is incredibly more violent. It's no longer you punching people in the head to knock them out. You are stabbing them in the stomach. You are slitting their throat. You are acting incredibly more violent. Again, tying it into the artist's dialogue, tying it into the message that they're trying to communicate with the age mechanic and with the overall game. I think that narratively and thematically and mechanically, that artist level is the most cohesive just because of that aspect and because of that difficulty spike. And I wanted to highlight that because I thought it was a really cool way to utilize a difficulty spike for communicating a message and serving the narrative. And I thought that this level was a really great highlight of that age mechanic and how coherent it is with the overall game itself. Like I said, they could have very easily used a life mechanic. However, they chose to go the extra mile to do this, and for that, I am grateful. On top of that, even the aspect of you losing more overall health and gaining more damage with the 10-year brackets is also exemplary of how as you grow older, you gain more experience and you become more skilled in your craft, but you become more brittle because you are getting older. I know I spent a lot of time talking about the age mechanic in this game, not about motivators or what have you. I just wanted to gush about it, frankly, because I thought it was a fantastic idea and I thought it was almost perfectly executed, and I really wanted to give it and its game and its developers its flowers specifically for that. Moving on, in terms of intrinsic motivation, I think that almost everything about this game really makes you feel like you're in a martial arts movie. Basically everything about this game is a love letter to martial arts movies in general, and this game does a good job of really making you feel like you are the main character of a martial arts movie. From the energetic and kinetic music in each of the fighting stages, from the incredibly inventive camera angles that they sometimes do where they pull out to the side and the game is 2D down a hallway for a little bit, or they pull the camera up and it becomes top down for a little bit, to the, albeit sparse, but I don't really think it needed to be any more in-depth, dialogue choices that you have for specific scenarios. They are trying everything they can to essentially set the stage for you to live out this fantasy, or to, in another way, perform your role as this badass martial artist playing through this martial arts revenge story type movie. And because of all of those stage setting aspects, it makes you want to perform that role of the badass martial artist as best you can. And it's really cool that they thought to do all of these things to give you the motivation to be better at the game. So yes, you're replaying levels to get a lower age in order to carry that into the next stage. You're also replaying levels because you want to perform your role of the badass martial artist better, because the game is wanting you to, because the game is setting the perfect stage for you to execute on that. And I almost felt bad, and I felt like I let the game and the designers down by being really bad at it initially. They didn't have to show on screen, hey, you're doing bad. I felt like I was doing bad because they were setting up all of these scenarios for me to go in and be really cool, and I wasn't being really cool. And so it was the stage setting itself that made me want to play better. It's kind of like you're in a play, and all of these things, from the set design to the lighting design to the costume design, all of these people worked so hard for you to be the star of the show. You really don't want to let the team down. You don't want to let the stage manager down, or the lighting designer down, or the set designer down, or even the audience, which in this analogy is also you, but you're also the star of the show. I'm gonna move on to my dissonant notes now. Actually, before moving on, as I was editing, I thought up some more stuff that I wanted to say. So I know that we had been talking about the idea of a double motivator whenever we were talking about the Devil May Cry high score system, and I actually found one here as well. For this game, the double motivator were these inter-level secrets and how it relates to the conspiracy board. It's a really cool mechanic. Essentially, as you're playing through a level, you sometimes encounter a locked door, a blocked off passage, a locked laptop, things like that. If you're playing through this level your first time, you're most likely not going to be able to unlock these, and so you're just going to move on and beat the level normally. As you're playing levels past that though, you might come across a key, a USB drive, something like that, that then on your conspiracy board makes a connection between what you just picked up and the locked door from that previous level. If you play through that previous level again, you're now able to unlock that door using the thing you picked up from a future level. And it's what you're actually rewarded with that is what makes this a double motivator. The intrinsic motivation is when you're rewarded with additional lore or something from the specific boss of this level, how they interact with other bosses, things like that. However, sometimes unlocking these doors allows you to get access to a shrine where you're able to get full health, unlock additional abilities and buffs, and sometimes you're able to just straight up get a shortcut throughout the level, so that if you're ever playing through this level again, you can basically cut the line and almost go straight to the boss. And that's the extrinsic motivation. And so these interlevel secrets are able to double dip in both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, because you don't necessarily need the additional lore and the understanding of the characters to beat the game or progress through the game. And so that's where your intrinsic motivation comes in. However, the extrinsic comes with these shortcuts and additional actual game buffs. To wrap this all up in a pretty bow before I go to my dissonant notes, I wanted to basically highlight why this game feels so consistent and tight whenever you're playing through it. And in large part, it's because of the motivators and how they're working specifically in this game. All motivators, intrinsic, extrinsic, whatever, they're all motivating you to do a specific thing. They're all motivating you to do something. The Spider-Man swinging, the intrinsic motivation of that is encouraging you to swing better. In this game though, every single motivator is trying to get you to do the same thing, which is replay the levels, learn your move set better, and dive deeper into this game. All the motivators, from the high scores to the interlevel secrets to the age mechanic to the setting of the stage that we had talked about earlier, all of these motivators are all pointed in the same direction. And that's why this game feels so consistent and feels so tight and well crafted. It's because it's all pointed in the same direction. This game is of exactly one mind, and that's why it feels so tonally consistent to play. And I think that that's really cool, and I just wanted to highlight that and praise the game for that, because not every game is able to do that to this degree. Okay, now on to the dissonant notes. The first one is that I really like at the end of the game, they almost directly tell you, hey, you can actually spare the bosses in this game. Did you know that? You should maybe try again, but instead spare all of these people. I thought it was really cool that they did it at the end of the game, because one, I didn't know you could do that, and so I was just killing all of them. And then two, it guarantees that I saw the darker road that my character could have gone down, and now I can see the lighter road. I can see where the character is sparing everyone, and they're choosing the path of peace as opposed to the path of revenge. And so I really like that they told you that that was an option at the end of your revenge playthrough. It was almost like a, hey, there's more game here. Speaking of there's more game, if you are not playing the arcade mode, you are missing out. Oh my god, I did not realize there was that much game hidden behind that mode. This game is basically two games, one of them being the actual story mode, which is probably what you're going to be doing first, and then all of the arcade mode. What's so interesting about the arcade mode is that they have so many more stages and arena spaces that they apparently made and set up and everything, but they don't use in the story mode. And so a lot of these spaces you're only going to be able to see if you do the arcade mode. On top of that, they do a lot of really cool and inventive stuff here. One of the decisions is that in the middle of the stage, they turn off all the lights and night vision turns on, and so you're now playing the rest of the level as if you have night vision goggles on, which is really cool. They do a lot of interesting things where instead of your focus meter being these special moves, it actually slows down time, and they throw a lot of enemies at you. They do things where enemies are one-hit kills, and so you're blasting through a bunch of these people. They do things where they give you entirely different movesets, and I was sitting in there thinking, you had this the entire time and you just didn't use it anywhere else? It was, you spent all of this time making a complete bespoke new moveset, and you are only using it in the arcade mode. It's so incredible and bold of them to do that. I think that if you just did the story and you didn't touch the arcade at all, you truly are missing out in an entirely extra game that they just have there. And so I think that you definitely need to check out the arcade mode on top of the regular story. I know I've been gushing about this game a lot, but my one big critique, and it is a very large critique, is that it feels like when you have identified quote unquote your combo or your go-to combo, your special sauce, is that you don't really need anything else most of the time. In this game, you have the potential to fill up someone's stun meter, and when you do that, you're able to immediately take them out. You press a specific button, it does a really cool and most of the time contextual takedown. It's very cool. However, once you learn the most efficient method of doing that, it almost feels silly to not do it every single time. The only reason that you wouldn't be is that it's not as engaging to just do the same combo over and over and over again and do all of these takedowns the same exact way. And so yes, you do have that intrinsic motivation of doing different things, and also there are extrinsic motivations for this, where in the arcade mode you have reached certain combo score stages where it favors more variability in your moveset, and also in the story mode, if you have a higher score, you're able to unlock more abilities and things like that. However, I kind of wish that there was some way that they, I don't know if punished is the correct term, dissuaded might be a better one, dissuaded you from using the same moves over and over and over again. Maybe the enemies learn that you typically do a heavy attack after this move, and so they counter it, or something to that extent. Similar to how in Metal Gear Solid 5, where if you are constantly headshotting everyone, they start wearing helmets to encourage you to do something different. Last thing I want to say is that you have the ability in the game to choose between two different characters, a male and a female character. And I specifically chose the female because I thought that it made the story more interesting, because as opposed to it just being a pure revenge story, it also adds a layer of a woman fighting against incredibly powerful forces and reclaiming her innocence that was taken from her as a child. And this runaway train of revenge was almost her way of doing that. And it also makes the artist level, like I was talking about earlier, another layer more interesting, because the artist is also a woman. And so it's these two women talking about revenge and talking about this power and things like that. One of them being presumably a little bit older, the artist, giving her wisdom about how this isn't necessarily the way to go about things to the main character. I almost wish they didn't give me the choice, and I wish that the playable character was just a woman, and this was a layer that they explored. And this goes into another point, which is, am I reading too deep into a character selection? Maybe. However, I personally find this exercise of digesting and analyzing and reinterpreting art as a form of entertainment itself, and also an exercise in critical thinking. I think that it's an incredible act of love to analyze and reinterpret a work of art like this. To put it another way, I only stumbled upon this interpretation because I was thinking about this game so much when I wasn't playing it, and I wouldn't be thinking about this game so much if I didn't love it as much as I do. So is analysis like that kind of silly? Maybe, but I also think it's an incredible act of love for something. I don't want to leave this game yet, so I'm thinking about it all the time. That's also why I make videos, is so that I can stay in these games universes just a little bit longer. And by saying that, the question then comes, is this one of my new favorite games? And I don't think it's my favorite game. I don't think it's number one. I think it is definitely in top 10, top 5. I've definitely sunk more time into it than it has asked me to. But Slow Clap is definitely a studio I'm paying a lot more attention to now, and I'm already playing Rematch, which is technically is a live service game, so I don't really feel comfortable co-signing it in a video that you can watch 6 years from now. And I don't know, Rematch is a game that isn't great anymore. I can say at the time of recording on August 10th, 2025, I am really enjoying it. Maybe on August 11th, 2025, they release an update and suddenly it becomes the worst thing ever. I don't know.